Hi, willkommen zur ersten Sendung von Lautstrom auf Reboot FM. Ihr hört Reboot FM auf 88,4 MHz Berlin und 90,7 MHz in Potsdam. Podcasts können abgerufen werden auf www.reboot.fm. Und Lautstrom ist ein Projekt von der bildenden Künstlerin Anna Bromley, also mir, und dem Komponisten und Multi-Instrumentalisten Jeremy Woodruff. Hi Jeremy.
Hallo.
Wir mit Lautstrom untersuchen wir die auditive künstlerische Arbeiten und deren wissenschaftliche und philosophische Kontexte. Die erste Sendung werde ich auf Englisch moderieren. Wir haben als Studiogast Marc Sabat. Hi Marc.
Hello.
So within the following hour, you have the chance to listen to an artist talk with Canadian composer Marc Sabat. Before we start, let me just prepare our German-speaking listeners from the visual art field by explaining some basic terms we will use later. Since Marc works with microtonation, it's fundamental to know the terms, just intonation versus equal temperament. So, on the one side, we have the systems of equal temperament, also called well-tempered systems, which translates into gleichtemperierte Stimmung oder gleichschwebende Stimmung. We know that from the temperament of contemporary piano. On the other side, which is the one Marc refers to, we have just intonation, which is reine Stimmung, based on harmonic intervals. Harmonic intervals come naturally to horns and vibrating strings. Vocal music imitating such sounds would naturally tend towards just intonation. Just intonation is any musical tuning in which the frequencies of notes are related by ratios of small whole numbers. Well, we will get back to that later.
In the Western music, in the history of the West, of our music, in a way, or my music history, I don't say it's yours, it's mine. It's very, for about 600 years, it was super under the influence of the church, right? Yeah. From the wishes of Pope Gregory to establish a kind of a Holy Roman Empire of music, right? So he develops the mythology of the angels singing out of his mouth and making all of the Gregorian chants, right. And then, spending big Roman money to send basically good musicians to all the different towns and to train the young boys. And whoever had the best method of training young boys was going to do well. It was like a big competition at that time. How could you teach them? And that is the beginnings of our notation. Then you could remember how the chants went. Mm-hmm. And that means that not all of the villages would develop their own kind of music, and then the church would be able to have an overarching presence. Yeah. And consider like Walmart. It was the sort of
great propaganda.
Yes, and then by around 1500, what happens is you have the first music theories that sort of distinguish between God and man, and I think that's really quite beautiful, where Sarlino says, God the Almighty is perfection, but in music we love to sing fifths and we like to sing thirds, but we can't tune them all together. So if we just bend the notes all a little bit, which is human, not divine, the result is that our artificial instruments can play this music also with the natural ones, which were the voices and the flutes and the violins or the gambas. Yeah. So you have this concept of the artificial music, and I find that kind of inspiring for a number of things, like the way piano you play the piano with computer sounds.
Marc, originally stemming from Toronto, Canada, has been based here in Berlin since 1999. Is that right, Marc?
Yes. Before that, 2 years before that, I was in Stuttgart at the Académie Schloss Solitude, which is when I first came to Germany, and then afterwards I moved to Berlin.
Ah, right. Marc, you currently teach at the University der Künste, Universität der Künste, like here in Berlin, and this year you will be an artist in residence of the Villa Aurora in LA and Villa Massimo in Rome.
Yeah, Villa Massimo is in 2011.
Ah, right.
Yes.
Marc works with acoustic instruments and electronics. His inspiration has been drawn from investigations of the sounding and perception of just intonation in music, but also from American folk, experimental music, and the relations between music and visual forms. Marc has been collaborating with visual artists in various sound and visual installations. His pieces have been presented internationally in radio broadcasts and at festivals of new music, such as the Donau-Eschinger Musiktage, Märzmusik, Darmstadt and Carnegie Hall. You can listen to examples and see his work at www.plainsound.org. Marc, as I mentioned, collaborated a lot with visual artists, like with your brother Peter Sabat.
Yes, who's a painter and a filmmaker.
Right, with Marike Lee.
Yes, she's a Canadian colleague based in Berlin, and we've been working over the last 2 or 3 years together in a kind of experimental curating project.
Right, and you also worked with the sculptor Lorenzo Pompa?
Yes, that's also a collaboration that began relatively recently, since we met in 2006.
Let's listen to Father, Suit and Watch, a project which you did with Lorenzo Pompa.
This is the latest version of it from 2009 in Amsterdam, a performance with live musicians, recorded music, video and dancer, which I guess we'll talk about after.
Come in, my old true love, and have a seat with me. It's been 3/4 of a long years since together we have been. Well, I can't come in or I can't sit down, for I haven't but a
So in the background you're hearing Clarence Ashley singing. It's a recording from the 1930s. And I should explain, we just listened to the beginning of the overture of the piece, which is 1 hour long. It is we call it a video ballet. And it is thematically emerging out of this song and out of a visual work that Lorenzo did to this song. Shall I describe it? We met in the atelier and he showed me some video footage where he was making dance movements against
that's himself.
Music of Clarence Ashley. That was himself, and he had this idea to wear a kind of an old suit of his father's, which had been in his closet for many years. His father had recently died, and there was some connections. They're both visual artists. His father was also a painter. And somehow he was addressing his thoughts about that, his thoughts about the past, about his own past, and set up this kind of scene in his atelier where he improvised dance movements for several hours. And then he was showing me this footage and saying, is that somewhere where we can begin? And this idea of connecting to the past and also to the artifacts that we have from the past, things that also, my father also had died in the same year, and also I have artifacts that connect me to a story of coming from Eastern Europe and coming to Canada and so on. And these kind of personal connections were a starting point. So my first response to the video was to ask a colleague of mine who does remixes and is also a producer, Michael Hines, to listen to all of my music up to this point, 2006, and he free to say, I want this and I don't want that, and he would just say yes, no, yes, no. He did it very quick, in like an hour. And he had already a scheme where he said, okay, this time, this layer, and then I gave it to him to complete a remix. And the score for this hour-long video ballet is a kind of re-examination of my own music, which you now hear again re-emerging from the song, by means of someone else, someone looking at my work and creating a new instrumentation, which I then translated to acoustic instruments, and the work proceeded in parallel with Lorenzo. So we took his movements of dancing and edited them once again into a kind of dance choreography, but one which was accompanied often by an empty stage. And out of this dialogue then eventually developed a version with live instruments, which is what you have to imagine sort of behind this music as it comes out.
So this piece, Father Suit and Watch, has both the elements of pre-recorded sound and live acoustic instruments. So I'd like to ask you, Marc, how did you think about the interaction of those two elements?
Well, first of all, the music was built up from many layers of my music, so intuitively, as it was with the dance. And then the possibility, which was in our minds, was that this would eventually be placed live in scene, and maybe in different kind of formats. So the version that we're hearing now is from a kind of pocket version with 4 live instruments, only 1 piano, and right now there's music going on for 11 pianos. So what I did is extracted 1 live piano part, which then has these kind of echoes that occur in the tape part. And so you have a kind of emergence of the live instrumentalists from the playing part. Also visually, they are quite still in front of this, the way to describe it, there's a square image, a video image of Lorenzo dancing, and beside it is a stage like in a Western, you know, sort of made out of wood, where the dancer comes out with boots and dances, often a duet with him, and then in front there's a tableau of the 4 musicians. And so we just have these kind of sharp cuts and transitions like you just heard in the music, and there's the live player joining in and dialoguing. with the material that comes in layers.
Okay, in this piece before we mentioned Clarence Ashley.
Yes.
And your musical references go back very much back into the past of music history. Like one piece is called "Free for Magister Zacharias."
Yeah, well, I'm interested in many aspects of the question of tuning. In the beginning, you mentioned sort of these two poles: the temperament on one side, the idea of temperament, and the idea of just intonation. Mm-hmm. And in a way, that model goes right back to ancient Greece, when you had the earliest music theory that came over from Babylonia was the Pythagorean music theory around 700 before the Christian era. And in that theory, the relations of small numbers were very important. They were also had other significances in terms of cosmology and so on, but they were used as models for musical intervals and for scales and for music. And they represented, in a sense, the idea was that music, in a way, was reflecting natural orders. And in a certain sense, our perception of harmony of music is drawn on those things. On the other side, the empirical practice of music is something which requires the science of perception, of how things are taken in and how they are felt, which is the other school, I think, of Aristoxenus. And he was a practicing musician, and he was somebody who believed that scales and modes and so on were things that were calculated by empirical experience, and they were often not quite exactly what the small numbers told us. And the fact is that neither one is exactly true, and maintaining an ideological position on one or the other, I think, is not what interests me. What interests me is to get at how we perceive the relationships between sounds, and sounds with pitch and sounds without pitch, and also how we navigate that, sometimes with a more rough version, like you heard in Father Suit and Watch, where many tunings are layered on top of each other, or sometimes in different kinds of precise manners. Coming to the idea of Magister Zacharias is another kind of thread in the old music history. Magister Zacharias was a composer of the French and Italian Ars Subtilior, Ars Subtilis Italica.
Which is in the late Trecento, to give a time perspective.
1380 to 1420, 1430. Should I play a little bit of the original Magister Zacharias?
Let's listen to some.
Yeah. This I should say about this music, because it was a parallel sort of fascination, the fact that this music had been thought of as theoretical notation so difficult that it was never realized. It was a kind of virtual music. And then on this recording, I was able to hear how it sounds. So this is a bit of Sumiti Carissimi from Magister Zacharias. was an excerpt from the beginning of Sumite Carissimi of Magister Zacharias, which then became an inspiration for this new work that I did in collaboration with my brother Peter Sabat. Maybe I'll start by just playing a little bit of the piece 3 for Magister Zacharias. It is, just to describe it a little bit, it is has a video and it has 5 speakers. So it is a recorded piece. It is a music film lasting 30 minutes.
Okay, you're listening to Lautstrom on Reboot FM 88,4 MHz Berlin und 90,7 MHz Potsdam. Podcast unter www.reboot.fm. Actually, this the piece Free for Magister Zacharias, like Marc mentioned, is a video installation. And your brother Peter, as I understood right, staged you playing it and filmed your hands, only your hands. And it is screened as a video installation, which seems to me to refer to the Trombley method. The Renaissance way of Trombley wants to create the illusion the viewer would be the subject of the visual composition by putting him into the vanishing point. It then appears as if the vanishing point of the painting would be within the viewer's eye.
And the way the piece is presented is this video is projected, so it's kind of like a floating window into this world, right? And then with the 5-speaker sound, you can create an image of the sound, which is right at the point where you would be if you were playing it.
Okay.
Right, so elsewhere in the room, there's only shadows of sound, like almost no sound, and you come into a place where you see the hands like they were yours, and then the sound comes into focus. Yeah, I mean, this piece it went through kind of a bit of a history. It exists as a concert piece, but in a concert you don't hear it at all. So the whole audience is sitting, listening. You play this whole thing, and people just barely hear it.
So it's almost, yeah.
It's a piece that Karen Zander was always a big fan of. When she heard it live in my studio, I did a loft concert with it, and she kind of got excited because it reminded her of her, white, where she polishes a bit of the wall. She has these works where she takes
Karen Zander,
where she makes it like a square on the wall or like on the grass.
And
so it reminded her of that.
Yeah. You're also a violinist, right?
That's right.
So, your compositions work a lot with tuning and tuning history. Probably, is it because you're a violinist? Is that one field which connects you to the tuning, the whole tuning topic?
Definitely my own experience and let's say the difference between my own personal experience and theory was what led me into tuning. Approaching music as a kind of science, as a kind of investigation, was always kind of close to my heart. And so I feel like there's certain areas, particularly in relation to intonation, but also in relation to form, where there is kind of yet knowledge to be explored.
As we were mentioning the Trombley before, this also has parallels to Panofsky's analysis to the central perspective. Panofsky describes how Vitruvius in his De Architectura suggests that architectural forms should consider the premises of human visual perception. So he thought our visual perception would be based on spheres, just like our eye is like a spherical entity. So when mathematical constructions meet spherical perception in the human spatial perception, this would create a disharmonic picture to our eye. That's why he suggested to develop architectural constructions based on empirical methods, and this paraphrases the writings on Aristoxenus on music.
Yes, I was talking a little bit before about Pythagoras and Aristoxenus, and I think that they both had quite opposing positions. The Pythagoreans were very attached to the numbers, and Aristoxenus kind of made the argument, well, if that's true, then, for example, if you have a small number relationship like 3 to 2 or 2 to 1, these produce common musical intervals like an octave or a fifth. But then if you just deviate a little bit from it, the ear at first barely notices the difference. It's simply like the sound is slightly pulsing, or it has a kind of delicate ornamentation. But if you represent it with numbers, suddenly the numbers must be very, very large. So the discrepancy between small number, large number, and perception seem to be a flaw. Both extremes have nothing to do with real sort of artistic research. You need both. You need the kind of precision that, for example, the numbers can tell us, and you also need the kind of softness that comes with various kinds of temperaments or various kinds of natural coexistence of sounds in a space, which do not necessarily come into any rational relationship. They merely cohabit a space in the cage sense of harmony. So I'm kind of coming at it from both of these sides.
Right. Maybe you can give us some examples and comment on them.
Okay. So this is I would say a kind of retunable Hammond organ. So First of all, that is a very simple kind of sound, and anyone who knows Hammond organ knows you have different drawbars. So I just added some different sounds. Now you have 8 different sounds. And I just played exactly the same structure of sounds you heard, right? But when I was playing it like one at a time, now I'm taking them away. You hear just a change of color. When I add them, you hear different notes when they come in. That is the phenomenon of the overtone series, which became well known in the time of Rameau and d'Alembert and affected the development of music theory. It basically says that if you have vibrations which are related by whole numbers and they are played at the same time, they blend. That is how organ pipes make different colors. What happens is when you play more notes at once, then all of these overtones clash or rub with each other. And if the overtones are not quite in tune, then they make a kind of a beating sound. And perhaps the clearest example of that is the difference between a precisely tuned sound and a tempered sound. So let me give you an example. Those are chords from sort of any normal rock song, and they're tuned in pure tuning. If I were to play them the way you normally hear them, then this is the difference. That's pure, and then that's what you hear just by changing the tuning. So you immediately hear a kind of like a Leslie speaker effect, a kind of oscillation of the sound. And that is produced by just subtle changes of tuning. And it is those kind of phenomena of beating that are related both to the ideas of temperament and then the ideas of complex tuning relationships. The in-tune sound is based on the harmonics, the overtones, and that allows more complex webs of pitches to be connected to each other. So I think we were going to talk about Wave Piano Scenery Player, the piece from Donaueschingen, which
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So that is based on these ideas a little bit.
And how did this piece interact with Lorenzo's sculpture at
Yes.
Donaueschingen?
The idea came up when we were taking a walk one day, discussing things, and I was telling him about a piece I'd written for piano and sine waves. So these kind of electronic tones we just heard together with the tempered piano. The idea was that the sine tones would mimic some of the actions of harmonics and of different kinds of interactions between the tempered tones to try to give the piano, let me see, what would you call it, a kind of to be able to understand the harmonic relationships better to the ear, and also to sort of play with the relationship between components of a sound and then the tone color itself. And what I was interested in exploring was the idea of a piece where something like this idea could be developed on a much larger scale, and where there would still be a live performer, but the live performer would be alternating with a computer, and that kind of theater, the change between the live and the not live, was something that would be not seen by the public, but perhaps somehow perceived or felt, so that it was playing between the idea of a computer-generated network, like this kind of Pythagorean numerical basis, and this element which is more imprecise coming in against it. And Lorenzo's idea was to cut the piano in half with a piece of paper and have one side where the sound comes out and the foot sticks, and on the other side the playing part of the piano. And that was just the beginning, which then developed into this wall of black paintings, which you've seen, I think.
Yeah, great. Let's listen to some sound examples.
Okay, so just briefly, the piece is in 3 parts, and we're coming in the middle of the first part, and the first part is very short, so we have about 2.5 minutes, and then that will segue into the second part. And then, I can talk a little bit about how the parts work. There are 3 different scales of perspective of the same material. So let's hope this plays. Okay. Yeah, so We're just listening to the second part of Wave Piano Scenery Player, a piece called To Damascus, which in the end is about 30 minutes long. And just a brief statement about the piece. It's 18 hours long, so it goes in between installation and concert music in 3 parts. Begins, like you heard, with extremely dense material, then the same material being played like it is now, where it spreads out and becomes almost like a concert music. And then there's a third part, which I don't think we have time to hear today, where it really functions like an installation. So it is, each second here is then exploded out into 3 minutes of sound. So it really kind of is looking at sound at a micro, macro level.
Yeah, I have a question which might be difficult for you to answer, but I'm going to pose it anyway.
Yeah.
What is the pertinence of your research in the pieces that pursue that research for sound artists working without systems of intonation, particularly, or pitches specifically?
Well, I think that, everyone is working with what they can perceive, and the question is to separate what we can perceive with what we think we like or dislike and see what is to be learned there. I think that that was one of the things that Cage did, which I think is very striking, is he stepped back from his likes and dislikes and stepped into noise and percussion and anarchic harmony at a time when Schoenberg was sort of making the statement that the future development of harmony is not to be expected, and rather systematizing his own empiric investigations, sort of going on the edges of tonality. And Cage just freed it in a certain way. And I think in a certain sense that freedom allows us to move in between the entire realm from pitch to noise, and particularly to ask questions about what we perceive as opposed to what we're used to liking or not liking. So for me, I love the phenomena of harmony. To me, it accesses emotion more closely and more empirically and more scientifically in some ways than many other aspects of sound. Loud, soft, density, texture, of course, these things all affect us. But there's something about harmonic relations where we perceive the actual relationships of things that coexist. And I think that that's a wonderful thing.
I think one of the things that is often difficult now is you have, people do try to, let's say, continue researching noise or something and be part of that, but often there's sort of a desire to say, okay, well, my area of noise is this kind of white noise. It's not the one that he's doing or she's doing. And I think with the intonation work, it is so abstract. It is so much about the basis of all kind of tones that in a way it applies to everybody.
Anyone who is sort of interested in those phenomena can get into it. I mean, on the level of beatings and pulsings and dissonance and consonance and the sort of texture of sound relations, I mean, those are some of the things in that particular field that come to mind. May not be.
Yeah, let's listen to that piece.
Right, yes. This is 2 players from Ensemble Kaleidoscope who are performing some of my music this coming weekend at Radial System on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. 8 p.m. on Saturday, Monday, and 6 p.m. on Sunday. This is Daniela Strasvogel and Bromley, violin and cello, playing a piece called Claudius Ptolemy.
Okay, you're listening to Lautstrom at Reboot FM. 88,4 MHz Berlin, 90,7 MHz in Potsdam. www.reboot.fm. Marc, what's up next? What's the next shows we can listen your music to here in Berlin?
Okay, well, the ensemble Kaleidoscope, we just heard Daniele Strassvogel and Bromley from the ensemble Kaleidoscope. They will be performing at the Radialsystem this coming weekend on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Concerts are at 8 p.m. on Saturday and Monday and 6 p.m. on Sunday.
Okay, and you can listen to more sound examples under www.plainsound.org, which is a collective website by Marc Sabat and friends and colleagues.
Yes.
Yeah. We have to say goodbye, and at the studio have been Marc Sabat.
Bye-bye.
Jeremy Woodruff.
Thank you, Anna.
And me, Anna Bromley. And the next broadcast of Lautstrom Project is July 14th, 14. Juli, and we then have in the studio Sex Sound System from Bremen. Ciao.
But in this structure so far, we still haven't covered the cucumber.
The cucumber is now my own kind of tuning structure. It is the flip side of wave piano scenery in terms of the tuning, in that it takes as its departure not the temper tuning attempting to connect it, but rather it takes the natural structure of violins, harmonics, and open strings, and the network of these empirically researched intervals which I work with, right? The tunable intervals.